Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, okay, so this afternoon we're on to part 2 of our Highland Park tasting. Hopefully what we're going to discover is that Highland Park is a bit of a late bloomer, so to speak, a bit like Springbank. I mean, although the Springbank 10-year-old has improved, considerably over the years, I still think that Springbank doesn't really sort of come into its own until it gets to its sort of mid-teens. And I'm guessing after last week's youngish Highland Park tasting, I think Highland Park is obviously a very similar beast, should we say. And so hopefully the samples that I've got today will reinforce that belief, as we've got a range from 15 to 17. So this should hopefully be the really sort of interesting point before we get to some of the really old stuff, which is really interesting. So yeah, hopefully this will kind of nail the Highland Park kind of character as what I'm hoping. So no need for any more waffle. I shall just introduce this afternoon's little lineup. Right, okay, so now one of the interesting things about this afternoon's little lineup is that all the Douglas Laing stroke Hunter Laing Old Malt Cask bottlings were all distilled at exactly the same time. So I'm guessing they bought a parcel of Highland Park casks pretty much at the same time, I would guess. So it'll be interesting to sort of chart the evolution, because they were all distilled in 1996 and then bottled 1 year after the other, you see. With the exception of the first bottling, which we're going to look at, which is a sherry butt, probably refilled sherry butt, judging by the colour of it. So this was the Old Malt Cask, 15-year-old, like I said, distilled in September of 1996 and bottled in December of 2011. The second 15-year-old, bottled obviously at the same ABV, was bottled in July of 2012. The third bottling we're going to be looking at is obviously the odd one out, because it's an A.D Rattray bottling, which was distilled in 1992, bottled at 52.5 and bottled in 2008. Hopefully the sample is still alive, and there wasn't an awful lot left in the bottle. Talking of that, I was hoping to use one of the current old particular bottlings from Douglas Laing, but unfortunately that sample was also from 1996, and but that sample had kind of died a bit, so I couldn't really use that, which is why I didn't. The fourth bottling we'll be looking at again is a 16-year-old. It is or was bottled in November of 2012. Then on to the two 17-year-olds. The first bottling was bottled in September of 2013. And the final one, this one, was bottled in February of last year. So hopefully this will be, like I said, with the exception of the first one, which was a sherry, but all the rest are American oak. So it'll be interesting to chart and see how they develop and how they've developed over the course of a space of time. So let's kick off with the first one then, shall we? Right, okay, so first of the two 15-year-olds, aged in, like I said, a refill sherry butt. So let's see whether they're as good as. Quite oily, quite coastal, a little bit of fishiness, soft, subtle, dried fruits, a little bit sugary, possibly, a bit of damp smoke. Barley, yeah, it's a nice cask. That's a little bit of herbalness. Palate. More sherry character on the palate, more dried fruits, earthy, lightly smoked, A little bit of coastal character, certainly on the finish. You can feel the saltiness in the edges of the mouth. Medium length, pleasant. Yeah, that wasn't too bad at all. Right, okay, and on to the second of the 15-year-olds. This is obviously, like I said, this is where we're going to sort of chart the progress, so to speak. So let's see what the nose gives us on this one. Oh, that's a lovely nose. Lots of citrus, lime, lemon, a little bit of oiliness, a little bit of fishiness, barley, fresh, invigorating, quite coastal. Oh, that's a lovely citrus nose. A little bit of spice, a little bit of damp earth, a little bit of peat. Charming, really, really nice, lovely. Palate. A lot more peat. Really fishy, earthy, not medicinal, but really citric. I mean, it's really green citrus. It's lime, green apple, intense, quite briny. That's lovely. That's really, really fresh. Lightly herbal on the finish, a little bit of heatheriness. But yeah, that's actually quite heavily peated for Highland Park. Lovely. Wow, that's good. Okay, let's move on to the first of the two 16s. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Like I said, this is the only one out of them all that's bottled at cask strength at 52.5, so close to the others. So let's see what the nose gives us. Thicker, oilier, more oxidised fruit character. Some barley, again quite fresh. A little bit of citrus, a little bit of honey. Gentle, just a gentle waft of peat and smoke. A little bit of caramel, toffee. It's the first one of the two that's actually got some sort of vanilla notes from the cask. But again, it's quite, the citrus notes are now starting to come through quite strongly. Again, sort of more in the sort of green citrus spectrum. How? Again, quite a lot of oxidised fruit, almost rummy. Now, I did read somewhere that said that this particular bottling was rum finished, but I don't remember it ever being rum finished. I remember they released an 18-year-old that was rum finished, but this has certainly got a rummy kind of character. So maybe this one has been finished in ex kind of almost Guyanan kind of rum character. Again, quite fishy and salty. Oilier, lovely intensity to it though, and you know, the combination of the sort of saltiness and the alcohol certainly gives it a quite a refreshing finish. So that sample has actually stood up really well considering how old it is and how little there was left in the bottle. So yeah, damn good, very, very good. Okay, so moving on to the second of the 16-year-olds, back onto the Old Malt Cask bottling. Let's see what the nose gives us then. More like the sherry bottling, actually. Although there's no sherry character, it's oilier, it's denser. There's no real citrus character coming through. Quite fishy again. Barley, a little bit of honey. Sweet peat smoke. Very subtle sweet peat smoke, it has to be said. It's not a in your face. A lot of honey. Getting quite sweeter now. It's definitely got some what I would call classic Highland Park character, that heathery sort of character, that heathery sort of herbal note. Very broad, very juicy, very full. Takes a little bit of time for the nose to actually start to get going and unwind, but when it does, it's very, very good. Palate. This was obviously a much more active American oak cask. I'm getting a lot more butter-kissed popcorn, toffee, a little bit of fish oils, a little bit of barley, a little bit of honey. Not quite as much peat as there was on the nose, but there's a little bit of smoke certainly coming through on the finish. Again, lightly herbal, a little bit of that sort of heatheriness certainly on the aftertaste. Yeah, again, another very, very enjoyable bottling. Okay, and on to the first of the 17-year-olds. This is obviously bottled by the new company, Hunter Laing, still obviously still in the Old Malt Cask range. So let's see what the nose gives us. Now this one is somewhere kind of between the two. It's got a little bit of the green citric character, and again sort of that heavy oily barley and honey character of the 16-year-old. There's not really any sort of real difference. I mean, this handful of months hasn't made a great deal of difference to the character of the spirit. Again, it's got some fairly active oak, some vanillin, a little bit of toffee. Quite herbal now. The herbal notes are coming through quite strongly, with again a lovely sweetness to the barley. Softly smoked again. Really summery. I think this certainly feels like that. It's definitely not what you call a winter dram. A little bit estery, perhaps, of some pineapple, apricot, you know, those kind of high ester notes. Bit of earth. Yeah, really complex. Very, very good. Really enjoyable. Hope the palate is the same. Oh. Yeah. Oh, where'd that smoke suddenly come from? Real, quite intense peaty character on the finish of that. More woody, certainly more active cask, but less of the sort of like the buttery vanillins and more of the sort of intense tannin woodiness. Again, fishy, briny. A little bit of citric character, a little bit of, again, sort of the green citrus, lime, but broad, fruity, apricots, a little bit of spice, a lovely peated finish. Yeah, damn good. And finally, the last of the two 17-year-olds. This one, obviously, like I said, was bottled in February of last year, so yeah, relatively up to date. And I think some of it's still knocking around online. I think it's not cheap. I think it's about 80 something odd pounds. But let's see what the nose gives us. A little bit more maturity, a little bit more oxidised fruit. Not obviously in the sort of rumminess of the A.D Rattray bottling, but again, pleasantly sweet barley, honey, citrus. Again, probably more towards the sort of like the barley spectrum than the citric end of the spectrum. A little bit of oak. Finally getting a little bit of Palmer violets, a little bit of that sort of Bamori kind of Palmer violets, and certainly when Highland Park gets really quite old, it can sometimes almost morph into this kind of Bamor kind of character, which hopefully we'll see when we do the next episode of the show, when we do the quite old bottlings, which should be quite interesting. Still no news from Maxim about distillery bottled samples, so whether or not we'll get to a fourth episode, of course, is we'll find out. But again, some pleasant esters coming through, a little bit of pineapple. Some sort of custardy, oaky vanillins. Dusty peat and spice. Oh, that's a lovely nose. That really is complex. Palate. A little more citric on the palate, but again, lightly oiled, lightly fishy, lightly briny. Not so much peat, a little waft of it right at the finish, but it's more kind of gritty, sort of spicy, peaty kind of character. Again, wonderfully fresh. That citrus is just lingering and lingering. Some honey, again a bit of herbal notes, a little bit of oxidised fruit as well. Yeah, another very good bottling. Lovely. Right, okay, so there you have it. That's Highland Park from 15 to 17 years old, and I think it basically summed up what I was expecting, is that Highland Park is indeed a bit of a late developer. It obviously takes some time for the sort of like the character of the spirit to really sort of start to show. And as we've seen, with maybe the exception of the first of the American oak aged old malt cask bottlings, which are very citric, it has a nice kind of balance between the slightly oily, fishy character and this sort of green citric character. Occasionally a bit of honey, a bit of sort of heather, but by and large really fresh, really invigorating and lovely dram. Why you'd want to sort of like blast that with sherry is just beyond me, it has to be said. Yes, alright, it will add some body and some fullness to it, and to a certain extent the first bottling that we tasted, the 15-year-old refill sherry bottled OMC was really nice. The balance was very nice, but even in saying that sort of dried fruit character did sort of take a little bit of the edge off the citrus and barley of of the actual spirit character. So for me, it's a kind of a no-brainer. It's, stick it in an American oak cask, leave it for 15 to 20 years, and bingo, you've got yourself, really first-class single malt. And why muck about with sherry casks and all that kind of stuff? I just don't see the point. I mean, I know there's lots of people that love that big Oloroso sherry monstery kind of thing, but it's just kind of like, unless there's got some big peat or something like that, you may as well be drinking any old thing. At least I keep saying it, you know, stick it in American oak, it allows the character of the malt to come through. And when you have something that's beautifully balanced, as mid-teens Highland Park seems to be, what do you need sherry for? It's pointless. But anyway, so there you have it. That's this episode of the show in the bag, so to speak. So hopefully you've enjoyed it. Next week we'll obviously be looking at some rather older bottlings of Highland Park and see how it develops once it gets beyond 17. So until then, hope you've enjoyed this episode of the show, and you'll tune in next week. Good dramming. No more whiskey left.